Hello, friends. Welcome to .org, the podcast all about how nonprofits tell their stories. I am your host, Matt Pearl. I was a broadcast journalist, a TV news reporter, locally and nationally for 20 years. Now I run Pearl Impact Media. I help nonprofits and purpose-driven businesses raise money, raise awareness, and distinguish themselves from the rest through meaningful, memorable, and affordable video storytelling. That's my mission, and an offshoot of that mission is this podcast. Each episode, I chat with a nonprofit leader with a defined, thoughtful, and successful approach to telling their organization's story. So oftentimes, I give presentations on visual storytelling for nonprofits. And when I do that, I always discuss the importance of the overarching strategy, making sure you have one. Creating videos, posting them on social media, all that is nice. But if you don't know why you're doing it, if you don't know how it fits into your larger goals, you're not using photos and videos to your best potential. My guest today has a unique perspective on this. He is the communications manager for Resource Rural, a fantastic organization that I've had the pleasure of working with. Ralph Jean, welcome to .org.
Howdy, Matt. How's it going? Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. And first question, Ralph, always the toughest. Tell us about your organization, in this case, Resource Rural, in 30 seconds or less.
Totally. So Resource Rural is a part of the Donor Collaborative Fund of the Heartland Fund. All three programs, the Resource Rural, the Rural Democracy Initiative, and the Rural Climate Partnership, are all focused on building capacity and technical assistance for rural communities. Resource Rural specifically, we're focused on working with rural organizations and rural people to build capacity for rural communities to take advantage of federal funding. So broadly speaking, we're trying to build private and build public funding for rural communities. And my job in that specifically is to tell stories about people who are doing that. I guess the most concise way to explain it is that we're trying to create some FOMO and some interest around public and private funding and investment in rural communities.
Now I'm going to give you more than 30 seconds. So when we talk about that storytelling, I think the way that you all approach this is fascinating. And I've had a chance to work with several organizations now where storytelling is not part of the marketing budget, or it's not this separate offshoot, but it is central to what you do. And I'd love for you to describe how, the goals that you have, they don't necessarily directly correspond to storytelling, and yet storytelling is directly responsible for the programs and operations that you have to achieve your mission.
Totally. So, yes. And one of the things that most excited me about the work is that in doing communications work, because I've worn a lot of different communications hats over my career, but this program is specifically focused on storytelling. Part of that is because our leadership believes in and understands the value and impact of storytelling. And so they're really eager and open to making a large investment in that specific part of our communications work. And so my colleague, Madeline, our communications director, we're really stoked to have the support of an organization that believes in storytelling. As you know, there's so much that Resource Rural does, and we want people to know about that. Well, there's a lot that Resource Rural does in collaboration with our grantees and our local resource partners. And so our goal is telling the story of the great ideas, the innovation, and the work that goes into building rural communities. It's sort of explaining that. First, giving that, sharing that story with rural people, but then, to some degree, making sure that those stories come from rural voices on a national scale. And so that's where storytelling comes in. It's sort of, there's all the work that happens, but it's important for people to know about it, build shared understanding, shared language, all of these things that come from having from storytelling, and so that's how storytelling kind of becomes the center of what we're doing.
So you hire vendors, photographers, videographers. You hired me for a couple of projects in Georgia, and our mission as your vendors is to go out to these smaller parts of the country, these smaller towns and smaller areas where really impactful work is happening, oftentimes thanks to either federal or state funding, and document those stories and convey them in a way that's, like you said, creates that FOMO in other places, right? And what I think is powerful about that, and you touched on this in your last answer, is the fact that you don't just have one or two people who crisscross the country and go do this. You make a commitment to finding people in these locations. And I'd love to get into that because, first of all, just from a straight up job description as communications manager, just take us through what that entails in how you go about finding these vendors, how you make sure that they're going to be able to do the job that you're looking for in conveying these stories.
Totally. So I mentioned how we invest in storytelling, and that comes not just by in the finances, but there's a time investment, and then like in the values commitment that comes with that. So yes, it's just 2 full-time staff who actually work at Resource Rural in our story program, but we have a team of at this point of about 10 contractors or vendors, a team of probably about 5 folks, contractors that kind of not work, essentially work for us full time. Um, uh, but working crisscrossing all across the nation to source vendors and work with the local community organizations that we're telling stories with. So my role as communications manager is to kind of be the touch point between all those different parties. There's a lot of collaboration. Well, let me take a step back. We talk about applied ruralism or practicing applied ruralism at Resource Rural, and I can show up in many different ways. But one of the ways that shows up for us is our commitment to collaboration, and I think that's reflective of like rural communities. And so, our goal in the story program is to make sure the stories get back to the communities they come from, but also to ensure that they're grown and developed in the communities that they come from. So, as communications manager, I'm working first with our communications firm that's helping us source contractors. They helped us get connected with you and identifying those folks. I also work with the local resource partners, and sometimes we'll get suggestions from them in terms of like who are the local vendors that they think would be able to do this story justice in terms of capturing the photos or the video, whatever it might be. But that's where we always start. Is we're looking to we're not just Resource Rural is not just in the name; it's in our practices and our values too. And so we're going to look to get that contractor from the community, ideally from the city, the town that it comes from, and that's very difficult. Sometimes there aren't, and sometimes there isn't someone locally that we can work with, and so we'll get as close as we can to that. That's where folks like Curtis Creative come in handy because we're just two staff members working full time, like I mentioned, and we're a national program, and so. The truth is, like, we're not really always in a position to build the relationships, to build the trust, and that's really key and foundational in a successful storytelling program is to build trust with the storytellers and the folks you're working with. And so our partner organizations are closer to the ground, they're closer to the community, and it's sort of that touch point. And so as a communications manager, I kind of work as the glue between each of those interactions, each of those relationships, make sure we're all on the same page. And that our storytellers and our partners values, and that that we're taking care of their stories throughout that process.
So there's you and your small team with Resource Rural. There are the partner organizations who you work with to kind of tap that network. And then there is the network of vendors who ultimately, the vendors are the ones who bring the stories to you, right? They're the ones who actually are in the field telling the stories. So you've got so many layers, right? And yet, they all need to stick to a very similar style, a very similar messaging, a very similar, not just style visually, but also style in terms of storytelling structure when it comes to video. Yeah. And I just think that's really, really interesting. Your stories, obviously, they need to feel like that they're part of one larger package. Someone should be able to watch 5 Resource Rural videos or look at the photos from 5 Resource Rural stories, and even if it's 5 different vendors, it should look like it was done by one, or that they were done by one. So let's talk first about what is that style exactly that you're looking for, and how did you all at the start of this at Resource Rural decide this is the style we want, this is the structure we want, these are the foundational things that our vendors need to be able to do?
Absolutely. So yes, there's a lot of cohesion across Resource Rural stories. I would say it starts for us with our framework, our messaging framework, which is the winning jobs narrative. And so you'll, which is essentially like an economic benefits forward framing about whatever story we're telling. We tell we tell well, a lot of different kinds of stories, but for example, a lot of climate related stories. And so when we talk about climate resilience and projects related to that, what we're in a resource rural story, what we're more inclined to do is talk about how that project will benefit people's wallets rather than how it benefits like the trees or the bees, which is like great. But that economic benefits forward framing we found and was found through the winning jobs narrative to resonate a bit more. And so that's always going to be there, and that's really where it starts, is that through line is going to exist really in all of our stories. But then really I would say honestly in terms of the media, so like we'll provide a creative brief. There's a 750 word long form story that like a written form story that comes before any media that we produce. And so there's a lot of consistency in that, and that creates an opportunity, like just it's a really useful tool, I think, for our vendors in terms of envisioning like what we're trying to capture with the media components. But then I would say really beyond that, the end product, what we create, what happens with that media once we're done with it, can take a lot of different forms, and that depends primarily on what's most useful for our storytelling partner, the organization we're working with, but also what's most useful for the storyteller. And so we were really formulaic, I think, in the beginning, but now we're trying to expand and be representative of the communities that we work with. There's a lot of diversity. It's dynamic. That's one of the things that I'm most proud of, is that we might not. There's a whatever the story program possibly might lack. I think we're really we're built to be dynamic, and that's representative of the communities we work with. And so the goal is that the stories can take different forms and look different ways at the end. But having that winning jobs narrative, that messaging framework that we start with, that consistency, and then also the consistency of the process in terms of how we check in with the storyteller and our partner organizations to make sure that we have the right messaging and the story right by the time we get to that 750 word story. There's been a lot of buy-in and trust building just to get to that point. So by the time our vendors come in to get photos and videos, ideally there's a pretty clear sense about what we're trying to execute.
That's great. And I want to go back to something you said at the very beginning of that answer, because I think it's so important for other nonprofit folks to hear. When you talk about climate storytelling in particular, even when the subject is in theory our planet, right? And the trees and the plants and the water that makes up our planet, right? All those things. At the end of the day, your framework is centered around people. Absolutely. And I think that's so important. I mean, that is such a bedrock of storytelling that no matter what the subject is, it's got to relate back to people, and finding your characters, finding the people who can convey the importance of what you're trying to say is so important. Particularly, I would think, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, but, I think people who, when they think of rural America, there's a very stereotypical image of what rural America looks like. And I think part of what Resource Rural does, and I know the two stories that I got to work on were just wonderful examples of this, is that you show a side of rural America that doesn't always get represented. I would say you show almost the entirety of rural America, and it's hard to do that if you're not showing the people involved in your stories, if you're only showing the land, right? You've got to show the people too, because ultimately this is all about people.
Absolutely. Totally. And yeah, you hit the nail on the head. The other through line that I didn't mention as far as the consistency in our stories, is that you'll be able to identify a primary storyteller. We've expanded in the story program where there's stories with multiple voices, but you'll be able to identify one primary storyteller. And it's that reason that you said just there, is that ultimately the people is what's important. Even in telling stories, like we tell a lot of stories in I would think, especially in rural America, there's I think a lot of pride for the land. They're stewards of the land oftentimes, and in rural people are in rural communities. And so there's really they are inextricably bound. But if you can't, the key is to be able to like highlight the people. And so that's what we want to uplift in all of our stories, even if there are other larger themes or projects. It's to really think about, well, how do these mechanisms, whether it be policy or the climate, these larger systems, and affect people, and in this case, like this individual storyteller.
He is Ralph Jean. I am Matt Pearl. This is .org, the podcast about how nonprofits tell their stories. Let me take a quick minute now to tell you about how I tell stories. I was a journalist for many years. I traveled the world, covered the Olympics 3 times, won national awards for video journalism, mostly for stories about the underrepresented issues and underreported issues facing our communities and the people and organizations offering solutions. Now I get to work directly with those people and those organizations. At Pearl Impact Media, I provide meaningful, memorable video storytelling for nonprofits and purpose-driven businesses. Maybe you want to raise funds, maybe you want to raise awareness, maybe you want to showcase your services in ways only video can do. I'm based in Atlanta but work with clients across the country, and I would love to work with you. Head to my website at pearlimpactmedia.com to schedule a free consultation. Back with Ralph Jean, and Ralph, I think one of the biggest hurdles for nonprofits in general is deciding that video, storytelling, even marketing in general, is worth the investment. Now, I'm a big believer in the return on investment for all of it. I think it's an outstanding return on investment that you get, especially when it's done right. And I think many of the nonprofit leaders that I speak with believe this too, but it's still hard to dedicate money. And especially at times like these when money is so rarely or is just so difficult to find. And it's hard to dedicate money to something that, at least in concept, doesn't directly apply to operations and programs. Mm-hmm. Tell me about the mindset at Resource Rural, where, again, you really center storytelling. Storytelling is part and parcel of what you do, even if the mission might have a broader goal. You've got a mission, I guess that I would say you could accomplish that mission in a variety of ways, right? The way that you all do it is with storytelling. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think part of it goes back to so what makes Resource Rural unique, and our communications department specifically unique, is Resource Rural's larger goals. And so I mentioned that we're part of a donor collaborative. And so it's essentially Resource Rural is a grant giving organization. And so what we're all about even at that fundamental level is like uplifting others. And so there's not a lot of value or interest for Resource Rural specifically to uplift their own voice. And so it's easier for us to then say, all right, we're going to take all that communications investment and put it into our local resource partners and organizations that don't have that same capacity. Because the truth is that it does take a lot of time, it takes a lot of time to do it well. And it can take a lot of money as well. And the fact is that even amongst our grantees and in our network, every organization isn't always in the position to take the most advantage of like the communications resources we offer. And so our goal is to like work with them and build with them up to a point where they can, but that's not always the case. And so it is something that we found, but there's a lot of resources. So like there's a story program where we go out and we'll produce those stories, but we also have our rural communicators cohort, where we that's a resource of the Heartland Fund broadly, where we're inviting grantees and their communication staff to work together, to learn together, share their ideas, their challenges. And then we're really big on experimentation and learning, but we're taking all of that shared learning and then giving it back to our local resource partners. But then also this larger network of rural storytellers and organizations committed to community development. And so that's why storytelling can be primary for us, is because frankly, we're not really as concerned about telling stories about Resource Rural as much as telling stories about others. But I do want to say, even as challenging as it can be, I think, even for small nonprofit organizations, whatever, it can be a bit daunting to tell a story, or sometimes folks don't feel like they have a story. But I think, you can start simply. And if you pick one platform, one channel, if you get your cadence, like we have the winning job narrative framework, but if you get your storytelling formula down pat and you're just consistent with it, I think there's an opportunity to really build from there. Ultimately, stories are, good stories resonate with everyone. That's kind of what connects us, I think, across humanity. And so you don't have to do it big, but if we can help, Resource Rural can help you do it big, but that's not the only way to do storytelling.
What's a success story that you can think of from your time at Resource Rural, where because of the storytelling part of it, it really helped a grantee or a nonprofit take off?
Totally. Oh, so I would hesitate to say take off, but I think one story that comes to mind for me immediately is a story. One of our storytellers, Alice, it's a story out of Georgia. We work with the organization Groundswell, was the our local resource partner that we collaborated with on that story. But they had the Soul program, and it was a really simple program where there was an opportunity for folks to apply to get their houses, some small like home repairs, maybe an AC unit fixed or replaced, or patching holes in the roof, things like that. Alice participated in this program, and she got her roof fixed. And then it was a really simple story. But we worked with Alice, we produced it, and then so there's that process of building up to that 750 word story and just getting to know Alice. How stressful that, and I think that learning about how you have a leaky roof, anybody immediately can resonate with, like, human beings need shelter, we need security. So I think there's like that immediate tension that folks can relate to. But then there's the resolution where there's this program, it's an opportunity, an investment in rural communities and rural people to improve their lives. And she was able to take advantage of that and get her roof repaired. After we did that story with Alice, I don't think it became my favorite resource rural story until we amplified it after that. And so after we produce stories in resource rural, we'll oftentimes, as part of the process of giving that story back to the community that it came from, a part of our amplification strategy after production is to put ad buys, or just boosting it essentially on social media, but particularly targeting that boost in the community where it came from. We did that with Alice's story, and as a result, there was just teams of comments, feedback about her story from her community, from her neighbors, people reaching out who are interested, like, hey, I have an aunt who's had this problem. Can she take advantage of this program? I have my mom's needs some housing repairs. Can she use this program? And a lot of people congratulating and thanking Alice for like helping them to know about this opportunity. And so she kind of became a local hero. And all she did was share her story, which is really brave and takes a time and it's an investment on our storyteller's part. But the impact of that was huge, where I think a lot of people were made aware of this opportunity that existed and they didn't know before. And it was really great to see the positive reception that Alice's community had to her story. Broadly. And so I love a lot of them, but that's probably my favorite one, just because of, it shows, I think, a really simple way, the value of storytelling, but how like everybody can be a storyteller. And in that way that, like, there's everyday rural heroes, doing this work, they're just living their lives and they don't really necessarily see it that way.
Yeah. And I would think that at this particular moment too, it's so important to provide faces and voices to a lot of what's going on in these communities. If people aren't spending time in a lot of rural communities, to get to know someone like Alice through the story that you tell can be such a valuable thing, not just for her, but for the organization that she represents.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And so, and so, that Alice is one example, but, oftentimes, we've worked with storytellers who have their own business. And so when we're able to support like a grand opening for their business, or, say like, yeah, we have this story, but we can pitch it to a local newspaper and say like, hey, there's this great resource, a health clinic is opening up in your county, or this meat processing facility is opening up in your community. Just letting, allowing folks to be more aware of that, letting them know like, this is what's going on. And then too, this is what's happening, but this is like how we got to this point. This is like the difference that it can make in your life. Kind of explaining that, and getting into the details, the nitty gritty, the richness of those experiences.
So far, just in what we've talked about, you've talked about the uses of storytelling in the following ways. You've talked about it as a way to amplify an organization's work, a way to fundraise, a way to help create and receive earned media attention, right? Because when you can provide details or visuals, that makes it easier for media organizations to provide column inches or to provide airtime on the local news, whatever that may be. I would also imagine that a lot of organizations use storytelling as a way to assert their significance and their importance to their stakeholders, to officials, to the general public, all those things. And I think that's just interesting. I'm curious for you, you obviously work with so many different partners and you see so many different organizations who are, looking for that kind of foundational guidance on storytelling. What are the tips that you tell them, and what are the tips that you would give to folks listening here in the nonprofit space wanting to really embrace storytelling, however that might look, but maybe they're not quite sure how to dive in?
Absolutely, yes. I would say start simple and start small. There's so many, like, I've I've gotten the question of like, well, should I do a newsletter or should I do social media? Should I do earned media? And the answer is I was like, if you can, you should do it all. But it's very difficult to do that, and sometimes not really realistic. And so my advice is often to start simple and start small. Pick
Pick
one
one.
pick a newsletter and like just be consistent. If it's every 2 weeks, hit it. Make sure you have that content every 2 weeks for your audience. So that's the first thing. And then, and I think the other thing that I often tell folks, and it's related to that advice, is that a lot of times people are chasing virality, or they want you want a big splash to resonate, but a lot of times I tell folks like 90% of communications is like at least 90% science, and the other 10% is like is the art. That's like, it's like, well, how do you go viral? And it's like, well, here's all these like technical things that you can do to stay consistent. Best practices that you can do, that won't guarantee virality if that's what you're going for. And I would say that shouldn't be your goal necessarily. But if you're consistent in those practices, then you'll build success and you'll build your audience, and that grows over time. And so I would say, like, pick one channel. And if you're thinking you don't have a story, you're absolutely incorrect. Everybody has a story. You just have to think, like, what are you most proud of as it concerns your work? What are you concerned about as it relates to your community and the work that you do? Those are two simple places to start, and then answer the question of why in either case. And I was like, that's the beginning of the story right there.
I love that. I know I'm on the board of a nonprofit here in Georgia, Lecotech of Georgia. And part of why I was brought on more than a decade ago was to build up our social media footprint. And we did it exactly how you described it. We started with one. We just started with Facebook. And we said, we are going to get consistent at one thing. We're going to learn how we can use it best for what our goals were.
Yeah.
And then once we feel like we've got the hang of it, and only then, we'll go on to the next thing. And now we're doing Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and they all have their different values and the different ways that you can repurpose content on them. But it's that idea that you don't have to hit a home run right out of the gate. And what's more important, as you said, is just developing that consistency, making it or intertwining it with the fabric of what you do, and making it so that it's just a part of normal operations. And for you guys, storytelling is at the center of that. But for a nonprofit where that's not the case, it might take a little effort, but you can still get there. And you don't necessarily have to do it all in one shot. You can kind of ease your way into it.
Totally. Our communications director, Madeline, she often says her mentality is, if you build it, they will come. If you build quality content, you build consistent content, your audience will find you. There's work you could do to go out and find them, but your audience will find you. Especially in rural, because folks talk, people talk, and they'll spread the word. And that's how we've even been connected to some of the organizations we work with and the storytellers we work with. Is that we've made that front end investment to build the trust, put in that time, and then we're able to get to the story, and then we're able to call those folks back and say, hey, like, this story, your story went here. Would you mind telling it, to this group of people? And then like, yeah. And it's like, hey, thank you for working with me on building that story. I shared it here, or can I share it here? Can I share it with this group of people? There's that shared learning, that collaboration again, that in terms of that version of applied ruralism, that I think, really resonates with folks.
Beautiful. Ralph, I have really enjoyed this conversation. I'm going to ask you that famous last question that all reporters love to ask. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you would like to add?
I would I would reiterate that everybody has a story. It's really, ultimately, it's about communications, or storytelling, rather, more specifically, is about having conversations. That's really what it is at the end of the day. And so if you're curious about how to do that, you can reach out to us. You do have to be in a rural community for us to have 45,000 people or less. But short of that, Resource Rural is here.
And how can folks find you?
Oh, yes. Resourcerural.org. That's resourcerural.org. Or you can reach out to me via email, ralph@resourcerural.org. We're also Resource Rural on all social platforms. Well, not on X, Twitter, but Instagram. You can find us on Facebook.
That is Ralph Jean, Communications Manager for Resource Rural. And as he said, you can find them at resourcerural.org. Ralph, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Matt. Take care.
And that is episode 7 of .org. If you found this helpful and want others to hear it too, a great rating or review wherever you get your podcasts goes a long way. Please take the time if you can. And check out my work at Pearl Impact Media. Video storytelling can be so beneficial for organizations. I would love to work with yours. You can book a free consultation at pearlimpactmedia.com. All right, friends, I am Matt Pearl. Thank you for listening to .org. We'll see you next time.